I think you've probably seen him before, is Stephen.
Thanks, Georgia. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. Just wanted to acknowledge two things real quick. I know we're a little lighter on the attendance side, and I see some of you with conference lanyards on your necks. We have a lot of folks at the Southeastern School Behavioral Health Conference this week, so including BASC folks. So just wanted to acknowledge those of you who were able to join today. During my didactic presentation this afternoon, my goal is to have you engage as much as possible in the chat with certain stop points that I have with chat prompts. So that's my pre-correction, just to let you know you're going to have your chat box up and be ready to type a whole bunch of things as you get rolling in the presentation today. The goal of my presentation is to talk a little bit about how both of the groups of cohorts are now moving forward together as implementers of MTSS for behavior. And I'll talk a little bit today about some of the evolution of our district partnerships that are going to be coming forward as we move into next school year, and the continued building of our community of practice here with BASC. So that's kind of the goal of what I'm going to talk about, big picture wise, and then also talking a little bit about the learning objectives on the next slide. My goal is to talk a little bit about some of the transitions that we'll have moving from one year to the next, where on our project, we'll be moving towards a model where we support you collectively as a group of implementers. And we'll talk little bit about how that will impact some of the structural changes that you look for and see as we organize and deliver our partnership work next year. We'll talk a little bit about and give you an opportunity in the presentation today to reflect on where your district and some of your schools fall. And then we'll talk a little bit about how that connects to the work that you're doing now and this more unified version of bringing cohorts together to recognize implementation stages. So moving forward in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit to start with kind of historically where you are here in this presentation. So within cohort one and cohort two, cohort one, just as a reminder, started this work a year earlier than cohort two. And we learned a lot when we moved from cohort one to cohort two. So we talked a lot about cohort one working on foundations and teaming and some routines. We worked with them really closely towards sustaining the district level of implementation and are getting to the point now where some of the cohort one folks have been in expansion mode this year with Train the Trainer, or needing to restart or retap the redo button because of some context I'll talk about later. Whereas cohort two got a chance to do those things a little bit earlier and a little bit more of an advanced timeline based on feedback from cohort one. And with a little more strategy from the project, having Sarah as your central regional behavior coach to give us more detail in the systems, routines, and structures you've built. So I just wanted to acknowledge that each cohort shifted in time because of what we learned about the cohort model, but also did different things at different points in time because of the way that we rolled out the information. So moving forward again, we talk a little bit from there about that the cohort structure did really serve an important purpose for us. It let us think through how we organized bringing you in, what onboarding, sequencing, those types of things look like. It allowed us to go deep within each of your cohorts to create more community within the DBC structure. And it allowed us to think about how we chunk our content to folks, what you get in year one versus year two, and so on and so forth. It also created an ability for us to have that shared momentum moving forward. Really, just an opportunity for us to get together and have accountability structures, reflection structures, the things you come to know and love about our DBC days when you come together. That all served a real important and targeted purpose. So, kind of entering into that first chat that I have for you, the chat prompt, I want you just to reflect real quickly in the chat about something that you've enjoyed about your cohort, working within your cohort structure. What is something you've enjoyed working with your cohort so far? I'm looking for some responses in the chat. Taryn mentioned that she really enjoyed the collaboration and being able to network between districts. Thanks, Taryn. Taryn must have read ahead on my community of practice slides later in my presentation. Thanks, Taryn. Other folks, what did you enjoy about the working within your cohort so far? One more reply. There we go. They're coming in now. All right. Networking, hear about other people's expertise, sharing best practices, meeting other people, time to problem solve. Yep, Aaron, thanks for that. Deanna, chance to hear how others are doing. Yep, and that problem solving piece. Awesome. Most of what you're saying in the chat is going to stay the same. You're going to have those networked opportunities. Just think about it as now you have a larger group of implementers that you're working with. So when we're talking about what this looks and sounds like, I'll get to the rubber meets the road later. But why are we changing this now, or what are we changing up exactly? Really, the label doesn't reflect what's happening in real time anymore. So when we're thinking about the cohort structures, year one versus two, cohort one versus two, doesn't really accurately reflect where each district is in the process of installing MTSS-B. So with that, we also acknowledge that implementation doesn't happen on a concrete schedule. We've provided you with phase checklists and goal documents, but your lived realities within your district mean that you have to prioritize different things at different times. Also, it creates some artificial walls, meaning we are creating sort of a barrier between cohorts, and we want to make sure we allow for you to share with a broader community of implementers across the state. So with that, some things also that we recognize is that we want to make sure our support follows more of the reality of your work. So thinking about our work in terms of stages or phases is helpful, but thinking about them as needing to happen concretely tied to calendar dates means that we kind of create these artificial barriers that are calendar based. Um, at the end of the day, one of the two of the biggest reasons that we're making this shift and bringing all of you collectively together at DBC days and at school team trainings is because you're really ready for that. You're both at the point where you're going to be having experience kicking off this work at the start of next school year. And for cohort one last school year, you're ready to get together and be part of this bigger community of implementers. In addition to that, though, in transparency, the need within South Carolina is great. And while we were able to really focus on both cohort and one and two so far, and we didn't actually bring on another round of district partners this last school year, that's probably changing next year. We're probably bringing on another group of districts, and we have to think about our really small team and how we can support. So we're trying to be strategic about that support while also acknowledging we're going to be entering into an intensive train the trainer model. We're going to be entering into advanced tiers land next year. So we want to make sure we have the capacity to support the expansion of the work within the folks that we currently work with. In addition to that, we're talking a little bit about kind of how we frame this support. So, framing the support moving forward in our work is going to be through the lens of implementation science. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of implementation science, but really within implementation science, we're trying to study how practices, how installing things like MTSS for behavior get adopted, they get used with fidelity, and then sustainably implemented. Hopefully, that language sounds really familiar to you. We've talked a lot about fidelity, a lot about sustainability within our work. So there is direct alignment to what you've heard from us. And at the end of the day, what we're doing with you is evidence-based, but the research is also clear that it's really good to know about a practice, but implementing them is a totally different story. It's a totally different way of thinking. Knowledge is not supporting implementation alone. There are other drivers we need to pull on in order to make that happen. So at the end of the day, part of what we're talking about here is that implementation happens across stages and multiple years. You all know that from your experiences. You know that from what we've talked about with you, that in order to actually install tier one related work, it's going to take 3 to 5 years for you to be able to do that. So what we're really saying within that is that the supports that you need are different at every stage. So that's what we're trying to say in this sort of where we're thinking about implementation science. And what we really mean by that is And the simplistic boiled down version of that is we need to differentiate how we support you. And we'll do that moving forward, especially through our professional learning models next year. So moving forward to that, the real connector, the real rubber meets the road, and where you're going to hear our language start to shift is in thinking about the implementation stages. These are predictable stages within implementation science that anybody goes through as they're trying to install something new. So we're talking about whether or not you're starting with general exploration. You see this with very often within district leadership teams and district shifts and district leaders because they're just trying to understand what MTSS-B even is. They're trying to understand if it's aligned with what they believe, what they value as a new leader coming in. So it's really about exploring what is this thing we're asking people to do? Does it align with what I believe and what we're trying to accomplish? And deciding whether or not we're moving forward. This exploration stage is genuinely aligned with our district leadership team and district behavior coordinator stages that we begin our partnership with. So all of you did this within the first several months of your work with us when we focused on getting your DLT together, getting them information, creating an action plan, right? So that's not unusually different from what you've already done in the exploration stage. And then we shifted you forward to trying to install some structures. What are the professional learning structures? What are the teaming structures? What are the things that need to be in place for data and coaching and policy and resources, right? So thinking about installing, we tried to give you that in your sort of landing the plane, as some of our people will say, year, where you get a chance to land the plane and retool it. And then we move forward in implementation science with an initial implementation when people are starting to use things, they're starting to do things differently. You're not seeing them do everything because that's not what initial implementation is all about. It's about building momentum to be able to start installing certain elements, start implementing certain elements with deeper levels of fidelity. And then as we move to the end of the predictable stages of implementation science, we're looking at full implementation. People can do this naturally. They do it as part of their day-to-day operations. The system is stable enough that we can start to add more schools. We can move towards a different tier. We can make this work sustainable with less support from us, right? Very few of us are at that stage at this point in the evolution of the work with the Behavior Alliance and Tier 1 multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. But the critical thing to think about within these stages is your district evolves and changes based on context within these stages. And your district's schools in the BASC partnership are also doing the same thing. So a good example of this in reality is we have some districts right now from both cohorts that have a brand new superintendent who's starting in a leadership role within the district. That likely means a need to revisit the exploration stage. Does this work sit with the new superintendent as a priority, as a value, as context they want to continue to move forward and buy in within leadership? And if so, yes, great, wonderful, keep chugging. If so, question mark, no, we need to have lots of conversations about that. We need to figure out a way to make sure there isn't a knowledge gap that they don't, maybe they just don't understand what MTSS for behavior looks like at tier one, or what do we need to give them to get them to understand the BASC work and the MTSS for behavior work in a way that lets them see it as not something as a competing initiative or part of the old guard of the work, right? My main point in illustrating that is that you're evolving. You need to shift within these implementation science stages depending upon the context of your district and the folks that you work with. The next prompt, which I'll ask Georgia just to leave this slide up for a moment so that you can think about it with this slide up, is given your current district context, given the work that you're doing at the district level, if you had to make a guess as to which implementation science stage your district is currently at, just drop your initial thought in the chat. So your options are right there in bold: exploration, installation, initial implementation, or full implementation. Go ahead and drop in the chat where you kind of think or surmise based on this very initial thought process and shift. Where is your district right now in installing multi-tiered systems of support for behavior at tier one? And Deanna, I see some exploration in there. Deanna is part of a very select track for exploration with Train the Trainer, so that makes a lot of sense for you. Taryn, you're exactly saying exactly what I'm trying to impart here in this part of the presentation. You have people at different stages, right? You're going to have some of your schools here, some of your schools there, whereas your district may be a little bit more advanced in this thinking. James, initial implementation, knowing what I know about your district, that makes sense to me. Kathy, you're exactly saying exactly what I'm saying. You might be going back to exploration because you have a brand new superintendent who's coming in, right? So the whole point is what you're illustrating in the chat so far. This is not a set in stone. You are here now, and this is where you live. This is fluid because humanity is fluid. Humans are fluid, but also context is fluid. So Aaron, yep, some installation with maybe being able to get a few things starting to go. That makes sense for what I know about you. And yeah, Kathy, exactly. Your district may need to go back to exploration because of context, but your schools may be further ahead in the process, which is what you're illustrating there. So my big picture message so far is that we're going to be thinking about our work through these implementation science phases, and we'll be thinking about how we can support you along the way with that lens, with that idea. We need to think through what we do with folks, with the folks of people who are at each of these implementation science phases. And we have to think differently about how we coach and talk to them because the phase tells us a little bit about what they need or where they're at, right? So great chat engagement so far. Thanks so much for that. The next part of my presentation is talking a little bit about the current reality across our partner districts, which was my lead up to what you just wrote in the chat. So thank you for already getting us there. We have some people who are all over the place, right? We've got some folks who are still anchoring installation, meaning they're still working to get that momentum to get something installed, right? Maybe they're almost there, or maybe they have norms up and throughout a building and people know them as evidenced by the walkthrough data, right? They're getting there, but on paper, it might look like they only have 1 out of 20 things in place. So they're getting practice, they're getting something installed, they're getting in their routine. That's okay. That's momentum forward, right? The problem becomes if we live at exploration forever and nothing gets to that point where it starts to live and breathe as something we're doing. So my point here is to say everybody's at a different stage when it comes to implementation, but some people might be able to be at installation now and move all the way forward to initial implementation next year because things will be more visible when you roll out, when you start, when you have a clear roadmap for the beginning of the year. And then we do have a few who are getting towards full implementation, a few districts who are. And when we're thinking about districts that are getting towards full implementation, that's when you know you're really ready and really tooled to start thinking about strategic and even sometimes expansive expansion, meaning expanding tier one across a lot of schools or most of your schools. And then also in coordination with that on the opposite side of that, when we know when we're ready to move up the tiers, when we're advancing the tiers, when we're ready for some targeted tier two support and work that our team will be rolling out next year as well. So just wanted to say in this moment across both cohorts, all our districts, everybody's all over the place. And that's part of the reason why we need to shift the way that we support all of you, because we need to meet you where you're at instead of making you sit through 6.5 hours of professional learning from us on a DBC day, all about the same content at the same time, right? So what we're starting to talk about is differentiating what we offer you based on implementation stages. Next slide has a little bit more details about how we're shifting that through this collective community of practice now coming together as implementers. So what we're really saying is after the summer university, where you will still have your separate cohort 1 and cohort 2 DBC days on the 9th of June, from that point forward, when we get together for DBC convenings, you'll come together as a collaborative implementer group. We'll start retiring cohort 1 and cohort 2 language, and we'll start talking about where you are within the implementation science stages as a more useful tool for us to ground what we offer you and what you focus on. Within that kind of grouped coming together, you're going to create a different community of practice. It's going to expand your network, right? And you saw from some of your comments in the chat earlier about what you've enjoyed about your cohort, you're just now going to have that access on steroids with more people in the community coming together to share ideas. As a group for cohorts, We started that because it was more time bound and administrative. This community of practice is already living and breathing, and we just want an opportunity. You all ask for that opportunity more frequently in your feedback from us for you to get together and share ideas as cohort one and cohort two together. And what it looks like for you is that you get to start learning from each other at your various stages. You've got some people who are already pretty close to full implementation. The exploration people can learn a lot from those people about how they started, how they built momentum, how they keep it going, right? So the goal here is to be able to have districts learn from each other at various stages for implementation, but also to think about ways to give you exactly what you need while you're at your stage. So just authentic differentiation. Um, our roles will shift slightly from that, and it just means that we'll be, instead of having two separate days for DBC cohorts, we'll be combining that into the same day with all of you moving forward. And that allows us to create that collective group together of the community of practice. And if we think on the next slide about what even makes a community of practice work, we're talking about just everybody coming together in a way that has a shared knowledge base, is able to have some practice in place so we can talk from authentic experience about what is living and breathing, and that we see each other as an asset, whether it's you in your role or us in our role. We're this community coming together for shared learning, and it's no longer just the BASC giving you the path forward and all of the resources and things. You all get to kind of more collaboratively see that together as a group. I'm going to keep moving us forward for the sake of time. So, Georgia, we can skip the next chat prompt and maybe we'll slide ourselves down to, let's go down to the what's changing for next year slide header there, Georgia, just so I can be respectful of time. So when we're talking about what's going to change moving forward, that's, I'm sure, what's on most of your minds is how's this going to look and feel different to me. From the BASC side of things, you'll hear us start to retire the use of cohort one and cohort two language. So we're going to be calling you all partner districts, tier one partner districts. Krista likes to call it kind of the implementer group. That's kind of how I'm framing it in my mind too. So you'll see us retire some of that language and have you all part of the same community. You'll see differences in the way that we structure, organize, and host our in-person professional learning and our Echo series with all of you. The sessions themselves, while you're together for the convenings, while there will be time for you to be together as a collective group, what we'll start to do, and you're going to see this model today when you do your breakout groups, is you get to select where you're going, or we give you some advice on where to go based on topic, not on cohort. So it's more, what do you need in that moment, and what can you select as something that is your highest leverage topic to be able to learn and dive into deeper more. So really what we're saying is the structure of all of our sessions will change. And then the way that we coach and talk to you about where your folks are will also shift because we'll start talking about your schools in those implementation science stages. Are they still stuck at exploration and why? And how do we get them to move on from that and begin to start putting something into practice, initially installing something? So you'll hear us start to make those shifts, but you also see it reflected on the calendar, and you're going to hear it in the language and the way that we offer you what we offer you. And then moving to the, let's go down to let's go all the way down to the chat questions, Georgia. So we'll scroll all the way down to the chat and say big picture wise, big picture wise, we're going to align our work to how implementation science says that a practice gets installed within settings. I want to hear from you in the last two questions that we'll drop in the chat. Question one, something you're excited about. And question two, an outstanding lingering question that you have, something you want to hear more about, so that we can think about how to give you more details related to this in a way that is helpful for you. So to close us out, to kind of land our own plane here, so far, what you've heard about the shifts, what's something you're excited about, and what's something you would like to learn more about and need more information about to feel good about the direction of this collective work? Those are your two questions to drop in the chat, and then we'll move ourselves along for the sake of time. I'm going to give everybody a few seconds to type up some responses. Thanks, Taryn, for the response in the chat so far. So it sounds like she's excited to just having that continued collaboration, a bigger community to be able to talk with. Great, thank you. Yep. Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate that. Nice to see you. Thanks for being with us. To see things actually become implemented. Yep, I think that aligns really well with some of the implementation science frame of thinking about whether folks are just initially implementing something or fully implementing something perfect. I'll look for one more item and then we'll move ourselves along. Yes, yeah. And right yep, the schools being able to see their hard work. I think also being able to frame this for schools in the you went from just trying to understand what this even was an exploration all the way down to actually getting some things in place, whether it's partially or fully we can talk about and talk about that within implementation science, but absolutely them seeing and feeling. James, yep, broadening that community of practice. Yes, yeah, and James, definitely. I think being curious and nervous about the experience for schools, especially new schools, is definitely something to flag and something we're thinking about too, especially within the train the trainer model. I'm assuming that's part of what you're referencing there, James. So, yep. Okay, well, thank you everybody for the chat engagement, and just a reminder, the slides are available to you to look at on the website. So if you want to go back and look at any of the language or anything, feel free to check them out. But thank you all for the time, attention, and the chat time. And Georgia, I'll pass it back to you to move us along.
Thanks, Stephen. Here's Stephen's contact information. I'm sure no one has his email address. So just in case you need to jot it down, here it is if you have a question for him. But otherwise, you can reach out to your typical BASC contact and they can help you with any questions you might still have. Okay.